Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Bree Kirsch, and I'll be the moderator for this session titled AI Literacy Initiatives at Bryant University. And it might also be titled Cross-Campus AI Collaborations. Sorry, I didn't notice your slide title until just now. Before we begin, just a few reminders. We do have our code of conduct, and if you have any questions or concerns about that, please email us at galeconferencesupport@googlegroups.com. And please also make sure your microphone is muted. I believe that's the default in this version of Zoom. If you have any questions, please type those in the Q&A function or in the chat, and I will read those out to our presenters at the end of the presentation if time permits us to answer those questions. This session is being recorded, and you can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. It is my pleasure to introduce Allison Papini, the Assistant Director or Manager of Research and Instruction Services at Bryant University, and Abby Dolan, the Research and Instruction Librarian at Bryant University. Please join me in welcoming Allison Papini and Abby Dolan.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Abby and I are thrilled to be joining you, and we are going to just jump right into it. So, next slide, please. Perfect. All right, so we are part of the research and instruction team at Bryant University. There are 5 of us on this team, and for those of you who are not from New England or think that Rhode Island is part of Long Island, we are actually about an hour and a half outside of Boston. So the further away we get from Rhode Island, the closer we tell people we are to Boston. And we have about 3,600 students at our institution, and we're just starting to have our first doctoral program. So we're really small, which allows us to have the opportunity to have a lot of formal and informal collaborations with folks on campus, which we're really fortunate to have, and we really lean into that, and you can see that in this presentation. So getting right into it, one of the first ways that we saw a lot of AI collaboration on campus was through course chatbots and an institutional-wide chatbot. So we were brought into that project last summer. The first one was Ask Tupper. Tupper is the name of our mascot. And that was for general campus information. So that bot was relatively easy to train with an outside organization where we fed it the information that was freely available on the university website, which meant that there was a lot of updating web pages and content and going through the conflicting content and all of that. So the library was part of that team in order to, to lend our expertise. We have an instant messaging service where we receive about half of our research questions through that. So it was kind of a natural progression for us to be in this conversation. Then this started to evolve into Strategy Guru, which isn't a great name, but I didn't name it. And this is specifically for an upper level business course. It's a management strategy. And what this opportunity provided us was really interesting because the faculty member teaches primarily using Harvard Business Review cases, which those are not going to be loaded into a chatbot. There's going to be copyright and privacy issues and licensing, and we just weren't going to be equipped to be able to support that. So what we did as a library was we asked them to pivot, and we actually helped them find, the different lecture notes from the faculty member, the videos that they've created to support their lectures, the PowerPoint slides, and all of that. But that still was missing some of the key information. So this was an opportunity for us to circle back to open educational resources, something that's been in and out of the conversation for probably the last 8 years for everybody. And we were actually able to provide book chapters covering the topics that the faculty member wanted covered. So things on accounting, and finance, and economics, and things like that. And we were able to combine these together, and you can actually see an example of one of the questions here. I asked it to explain the DuPont formula, and it gives me all of this information. But then you can actually hit the source button, and it'll bring me to the book chapter that the information came from, so students can contextualize this learning. So this is one of those areas where the library was able to leverage our knowledge and experience on information and information sources and incorporate that into the building of these AI models. A similar bot is coming soon. It's called Finance Tutor for the lower level classes. And the thing that these bots both have in common is that they are trained to not answer certain direct questions. So if the students are reading those Harvard Business Review case studies or working with a certain financial statement, so say they're looking at Apple, if they ask a question about Apple or one of the cases, the tutor or the chatbot will ask them, okay, so I can't answer that. What concepts are you having a hard time with? And the students are finding this to be really beneficial because it's available 24/7. The faculty member, who is a really, really patient person, but students may feel intimidated or not want to ask the same question over and over, can truly get to the heart of their explanation. So this is just one of those ways that you can see how we're taking an active role in AI development on our campus. And it just happened to come through our existing knowledge and kind of, asking to be let into the conversation. So this is just one example of like a campus-wide effort, but Abby is going to move into talking about, one more thing, AI syllabus statements. I don't have my slides up. So this is the other one where I worked with some sociology classes to start with. And we were having a conversation about what is generative AI, how is it created? How can we be literate consumers of this? So this really came up organically when I referred to, oh, Professor so-and-so has this syllabus statement on AI policy. And the students all looked at me and they were like, a syllabus what? First of all, half of them weren't sure what the syllabus was. We talked about that. But then the other half were like, we don't get it. We're scared. We don't know what to do. So what I did with that faculty member, who's awesome and a huge library supporter, so we were able to kind of bounce off of each other, was I said, all right, cool. Here's what we're going to do. We want to know what you think about the syllabus statements. But of course, the students weren't really open to giving clear feedback to their faculty member in the room. So I said I would act as the anonymizer, the third party. So I created like a super simple like Google form, and I just asked, what do you like about this statement? What do you dislike? What's confusing or unclear? What could be changed or added? And we got some really, really good concrete examples that I've been able to use with other faculty members to help inform their AI policy generation. And a lot of the times it was the students were afraid to be using AI because they didn't want to be accused of plagiarism. They didn't know what situations it was going to be allowed in. And it was a basic illustration of the lack of AI literacy held by our students. So this is just kind of leading up to the background of the project that Abby was working on, which she is going to get into right now.
So we came about through this whole process. We ended up talking to a professor, Carrie Kell, who runs the freshman required writing class. So it's one of those ones that most freshmen do have to take some test out of it, but by and large, this was our opportunity where we knew anything that we presented in this class would be almost unilaterally presented to all of the first year students. So myself, Allison, as well as our director, Laura Cole, worked together with this professor to try to come up with our approach to how we wanted to tackle this. We knew from the beginning we didn't want to take a AI is bad, don't use it approach, because we see when you say that, students just kind of assume, okay, I can ignore this person, just do it quietly on my own. So we had a few different goals going into it. One of our big goals when developing this freshman writing course to try to answer a lot of those questions that came up in that syllabus discussion that came up when students are asked about AI is just kind of the demystification of it. A lot of them don't really know how it works. You know, when they see news stories about it, when people are talking about it on TikTok or Instagram, it's presented as this kind of magical thing that they type their answers in and they get the perfect results that they want. So our first priority was the demystification of it, was explaining to them what generative AI actually is, how it works, how it gives them those answers, where that information comes from. And then we wanted to inform them on specifically Bryant's AI policy. So there is a campus-wide approach, which is essentially comes back to look at what your professor says. But Bryant is trying to push a more AI forward approach. So trying to encourage students to and professors to utilize AI whenever it's appropriate. So in this case, we also set up a process where students would be able to learn about what cases could be considered academic dishonesty in the use cases of AI versus what ones were okay. Like, you know, if I put in my essay question and it gives me search terms, that's okay. That would not be considered academic dishonesty. Versus here's the situation where a professor has said very distinctly, do not use AI for any part of this essay, but I have it edited. No, that's not. The biggest thing is we also wanted to encourage critical thinking. We wanted to encourage students to not just have a blanket approach. It's not about never using AI or always using AI. It's about using their critical thinking and coming up with ideas of when they should be using AI and when they shouldn't. And also critically thinking about that AI generated content, not just taking whatever ChatGPT gives them wholesale, but looking at it, analyzing it, figuring out, do I need to edit this? What pieces of this actually work for me? Taking a more critical approach as they used it as a tool. And our other goal was to focus specifically on AI and the writing process. Because this is a freshman writing class, one of the big projects they do is a research project where they write a multi-page essay using at least 5 peer-reviewed sources. So we want to try to integrate ideas of where they could use it specifically in that writing process as a tool, but without going against academic dishonesty policies. So our process, we started with defining these goals. This was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussing different ideas and sitting together over the summer. And then we broke into like the sections of the course. So we started with what is generative AI? What are the different tools? How does it work? Generative AI and information literacy. We use the ACRL information literacy framework and discuss the different aspects as it relates to generative AI. And then we went into prompting and coming up with good prompts and how to use them, as well as the Bryant academic honesty policy and citing AI. But that also requires that we build it in something, because these are all fantastic, but because the freshman writing course is so large, there are a number of different professors that teach this course. Coming up with a lesson plan is great, but they all have a variety of knowledge on AI. So we would need more work to build them up to that point. So we decided the best approach would be to build it in Rise 360, which Rise 360 is an Articulate program. It allows you to build these nice interactive courses. So in this case, the other advantage of Rise 360, you can embed it directly into different school curriculum. So we embed ours directly into Canvas, which is what we use for those courses. So professors, it doesn't take much work on their end to embed it directly into their course page. And then students can easily find and access whatever we need. The other big advantage is then moving forward, we're building off the same framework. We know these students are starting with the same ground level information that we're providing to them, and we know what that information is, and we've all worked together to develop it. So, how was the feedback? We had a few different approaches. So I presented to all of the Gen 106 professors right at the beginning, and I told them all, I am so excited to talk about AI to your students. If any of you want me to come in, please tell me, and I will come in and talk about AI to your students. And I had one professor take me up on it. But it ended up really successful because we focused it on an open discussion approach. So I went in with this professor. We had 2 different classes, and it was the same the same freshman writing class where they had already done the generative AI course. So I knew they had already completed all the assignments. They already had discussed what is generative AI, so they should have a groundwork the same basic ground level information. We knew that they had discussed how to cite it properly, when it was okay and not okay to use it. So I decided to approach it as an open discussion. I had talked to this professor previously, and she said, despite using this course, she still felt like a lot of students were just kind of using it nonstop. They were using AI for things like personal reflections and things like that. So we wanted to try to do a few different activities to just kind of get them thinking critically about AI once again. So we started with an open discussion where I just asked them, how do you think AI works? And a lot of them did pull information from that course they had taken. A lot of them were able to say, oh, it uses this data, and based on the data gives what's a likely answer to this question based on previous questions. And some of them said, well, it just tells me right and wrong. And some of them said, oh, it just gives me all of the facts I need. It's just like Google. So there was some confusion, but we led it as an open discussion. So it wasn't me correcting them, the other students in the class using that information that they had all learned in that course we developed were able to help discuss it with them and break it down. And then we talked about, when is it okay to use AI? And we talked about the different examples from their course. We talked about different examples that they came up with, different examples the professor came up with. And then we did a couple of more AI-focused activities to, again, get them thinking critically, including we had a little sheet that I created where we had an example of text that I had edited, as well as text that generative AI had edited, and they just had to guess which one was which. And we talked about the differences in editing style. They said they liked that generative AI took out the big fancy words that I had left in, but they also liked that mine felt a little more stylized. So we talked about those advantages and disadvantages. And then finally, my favorite activity was both classes. By the end of the class, they felt very confident in their ability to use generative AI correctly and that they knew 100% what they were doing. So I said, okay, here's how it's going to work. There are like 20 something of you in this class. We're going to have your professor leave the room. You're all going to work together. If you can trick her and get her to pick a piece of writing that you all wrote and think that it's AI written, I'm going to buy you all candy. And they were immediately invested, so in. So she left the room. We pulled up a Word document. They had to write a paragraph all together and then have ChatGPT generate a paragraph. They could prompt it as many times as they like to make changes to the paragraph, changes in the spelling, changes in the editing. At the end, they were all put into one document together. So we had paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. The professor came back in, and both classes, both times, she immediately knew which one was AI and which was the students. There was an immediate uproar afterwards, both times. Students accused me of cheating. There was fingers pointing. There was names flying. There was so much chaos. But it got this point across that despite their confidence in this tool, the professors knew more than they thought. So we had a discussion again of we asked the professor, what did you notice? What did you point out? And so I asked them, hey, if this is your approach, do you think generative AI is saving you any time if you have to do all of this editing to take out all of these pieces? Or do you think using it more as those ways we talked about earlier in the class are the better way to use it, of using it as an assistant, helping you generate search terms, helping you with flow and editing? But when you're doing the writing yourself, you're saving yourself time by not using it to write it for you. And it led to a pretty positive feedback. I still had a couple of students who clearly thought I had cheated and told her in the hallway which was which, and I still got them some candy the next week. But overall, it led to a really positive discussion. And the student response, so we got a form going at the end, and we collected a lot of different student responses on how they felt about the generative AI course that the freshman writing class were required to take at least some portions of. And by and large, they were all fairly positive. So we asked, what did you find most valuable about the AI course? And you see some said it taught me how AI can be biased. And even if you use it for research purposes, it's still up to you to fact check that information. We had some that they say they found alternative ways to use generative AI to help in their writing, which is fantastic because that's what we wanted. We wanted them to see that it's a tool that can be so helpful when used successfully and correctly. And then we also asked what aspects of the AI course could be improved. Some of them were really helpful feedback that we're definitely going to take into effect. They want more interactive and more specifically on those like interactive courses on seeing AI in action as that helpful tool in a way that fits in with those academic honesty policies we discuss. And some people thought we were asking to fix AI in general, so they asked us to make it not hallucinate anymore, which would if I could. But by and large, it led to a really successful conversation with these students. So they were really willing to take an open and engaged approach. And I think that leads us to takeaways.
So this is where I want to ground this conversation is regardless of your comfort level with the actual technology behind generative AI, it's important to remember that we're the information experts. We're the ones who understand how information is gathered, how it's contextualized. Refer back to the ACRL framework for all of that. But have confidence in your knowledge about this because we have some people who are a little bit reluctant to join the AI conversation, but you know more than you think you do. And this can come through by doing things like activating your prior knowledge. So things like copyright, OER, privacy, data literacy, information literacy, all of these things are coming into play. You know more than you think you do. I'm just going to keep saying that because I have to say that to myself all the time. And embrace those serendipitous moments. I had an entirely different plan for those sociology classes that I went into, where we ended up talking about the syllabus statements and ethics. And I thought that the students had a greater baseline understanding of AI, which it turns out they didn't. But I was able to have these conversations, or Abby finding out that the students couldn't trick the professor and how that had to, shift the way she was approaching her teaching. The last thing I want to say is advocate to be included in conversations. So don't just advocate for yourself, advocate for your colleagues, advocate for people in other departments. So as we're having these conversations, hey, these people in accessibility services should really be consulted to make sure that we're not missing anything super obvious, because that isn't where my knowledge is or my expertise. So with all of this, AI is complicated. We know it's complicated. We know it's going to be around in whatever incarnation. And we know that everything is going to change really rapidly. So the best thing that we can do is to position ourselves as librarians to be the experts on campus in order to make sure that people are best equipped to be able to use generative AI. So I know that we ran a little quick on time, but that means we've got extra time for Q&A. So if you want to continue the conversation, we have our information up on the next slide. There it is. I know we went super fancy with our slides, but we figured we would focus on the content rather than the design. Yeah, also, we've seen a lot of the same AI images and needed a break from that. So we would love to take any questions that anybody has, any comments, any insights. We would love to hear from people.
Thank you, Abby and Allison. We do already have a question in the Q&A, and for those that have questions, please type them in the chat or the Q&A, and we should have time to get to them. So the first question is, what software did you use to create Strategy Guru?
All right, so the way that this one worked was there is a group that has an affiliation with Bryant University who is trying to get into the higher education sphere because they've been creating customer service chatbots for a while, but they wanted to kind of move beyond that. So Bryant was able to found a partnership with them where they did the coding and the loading of the information and all of that. And then we had a group on campus that was responsible for maintaining the content, doing all the the troubleshooting of the responses. We had massive problems trying to get the library hours in there for some reason. So we were really lucky to have a partner for that. So I wish I had some like magic program that worked, but it was honestly these magic people.
Thank you. And I have a quick question for you while we wait for other questions to come in. What would you do if the professor had guessed that the AI produced content was the student work in your Fool the Professor activity? How would you approach it differently?
So the only difference was all of these I approached with the intent of, regardless of the outcome, it would lead to a productive conversation with the students and allow them to critically approach and discuss what did they do to fool the professor? What did they have to do? So if they hadn't fooled her, my outcome at the end of them not being successful both times was we discussed the ways that generative AI, is not as successful in producing this writing piece, but is great for these other uses. And what's the best way to use it to actually save you time? But in comparison, if they had successfully fooled her, the conversation would have been, how much time did this actually save you? How much work did you have to go through? How many reprompting did we have to do to get to this final result that could actually fool your professor? And at that point, we would have led to kind of the same discussion of, when is AI a valuable tool to help you save time versus when is this actually spending more time than if you had done it without AI? It's always the trade-off. I try to present it as like a sales pitch. I try to do this with all my library databases. I tell the students, my job is to get you the best grade in the least amount of time. Sometimes that's through the library databases. Sometimes it might be through generative AI if the tool is the right one. But it's the trade-off of, when is it helping you versus when is this actually taking you more time?
Thank you. And we do have another question from Amelia. Do you have any advice to scale upward this kind of coursework for a larger university?
Abby, do you want to take this? I think she's referring to the
Yeah.
writing class.
So the good thing here is that the writing class is one of those that, on a larger scale in a lot of universities, you do have, generally, you'll still have these large scale courses that a lot of professors teach. And the way we approached it that I think is still applicable for larger scale universities is we made it in a way that none of the content in the actual course at the end was graded work. So there was nothing that was required. There was nothing that was going to impact the actual syllabus that was set up by these various professors who were handling it. So it meant that they could take an approach of choosing which pieces they wanted to use and which they didn't. If I was working at a larger scale university, what I would try to do is approach at different department levels, have some sort of content available or some sort of smaller scale so you can show them and talk about, hey, here's the pieces, here's the kind of content that they take from these elements of the courses. Which do you want me to set up for you, or which could you use in your classes? And just showing them how much of it is up to the professors, I think, is a really valuable approach. Putting it in their hands, but making it easy is the best way.
Okay, and we have another question from David. Did you discuss the environmental or resource impact of AI at all? And if so, what kind of response did the students have to that?
We discuss it a bit in the when we actually have a whole section when we're talking about different aspects of AI. This is covered under the academic honesty policy, as well as different issues in generative AI when we're talking about the general, what is it? We do discuss both the environmental impact as well as the possibility for bias that's inherent in a lot of generative AI models and the ability for it to be wrong. And all of these are impacts that we try to present as, this is something to consider when you're choosing to use generative AI. There is a cost to this, and this is something you should think about. And that's also something I have discussed in the class. When we had that open discussion, it didn't come up in both class periods, but one class period, a student did say, I don't use it for anything because I feel bad for the planet. And I said, that's a valid approach. It's, no one should be forced to use it because of that environmental impact. But when you are using it, it's just something you should keep in mind. And it leads to that piece, again, of that value comparison of, is this worth it for what I want to do and what I want to accomplish?
And one thing I would want to add to that is that the library's perspective is that we're asking people to be very intentional in their use of it. So one of my big pet peeves is when I see people using generative AI to ask a question that could be done via Google with a lower resource impact. We also had conversations about the social impact of it, promoting and hurting equity, and talking about what went into actually having to create these models and the ethical use of the information in them. especially like the large models like ChatGPT and Claude and so on. So this is something that we're trying to make people be very aware of. So while it does sound like we're AI champions with an asterisk of it has to be the right tool for the job.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from Paula. When you went into the writing class, did you have the entire class time?
I did. So I was really fortunate. I had been speaking with this professor basically since the beginning of the semester when we were trying to figure out when is the best time for me to come in. We discussed me coming in right at the beginning versus me coming in after they had already done the generative AI course. And we discussed how much time I could use. And I told her I'd be willing to cut it down if she had other things she wanted to get to. But this professor was really fantastic and said, I want you to have the whole time because I think it's very beneficial to the students and very beneficial to the professors. So it ended up just over an hour, so like an hour and 10 minutes. The thing that took the longest was that fool the professor, but that is something that could definitely be cut down. The students definitely took more time because they knew they had it. So they were constantly going back like, oh, let's add an extra period here. Oh, no, wait, delete this, rearrange this. One group, their little paragraph was about why it's better for students to go to school later and be able to sleep in and not have morning classes. This was an 8 a.m. class, which I think was part of it. And they were going in and like looking up real statistics to put in theirs. And then in the fake AI, AI one, they were then altering their real statistics to be slightly off to try to make it seem fake. And I told them, I don't think she's going to fact check you all right here when she walks back into class. But it was showing that they were aware of the kind of inconsistencies. But we had that whole amount of time to play with. So they definitely took more time. I think a lot of these could be condensed down.
Thank you. And it looks like Melinda's asking, can you explain the course you're talking about? Is this a separate tutorial that's embedded in the class, or is it a credit-bearing class?
Yes, so it's a separate tutorial that's embedded in the class for Canvas. So their class that is required is like a general Gen 106. It's the required freshman writing course that is a credit-bearing class. This was an aspect of that course that was embedded into their Canvas, and each professor who taught that was allowed to was encouraged to tell them how much of that course they wanted them to complete. However, the only thing the professor could see at the end was how much of the course the student had done. So there was no aspect of testing in there. There's no aspect of, any sort of quizzing or anything like that. It was just about completion. But it is a distinct course within. It's using the Rise 360 software, which is from a company called Articulate, which makes interactive course material. So it allows for both things. You can write text, embed videos. You can have little interactive quizzes that aren't for grades, but little like you have one for academic honesty. We had one where it would be a little description of a situation. And at the end, it would say, do you think this is a case of academic dishonesty or not? And then they would click on the card and it would flip over and say yes or no and explain why. You had one where we had different examples of situations and they had to sort if they thought it was a good use case for AI, maybe depending on the situation, or not at all. And they sorted out and decided. But it just allowed us to present all of this information in a setting that they could do self-paced.
One of the things that we had to keep in mind for this is that because this is an intro-level class, by the nature of the way it works here, most of these are adjunct faculty. So these are people who are working at 3 institutions. They do not have a lot of time for course prep. And for the ones that were less comfortable with AI, this would be an easy thing for them to leave off the plate. So the idea was to make something that was plug and play and that they could adjust to their own comfort level and their own awareness level, with the goal of ultimately incorporating more and more of the tutorial into the course as we progress through the semesters.
Great. We have quite a few questions coming in about the RISE course now. So I'll try to go through them as we're able. What kind of content was covered in the AI class, and can you share the class, or is it solely internal?
So I don't know if we can share it. That might be a better question. But in terms of the content, so we had our first module is what is generative AI? The second module was specifically like the concerns with AI, both academic honesty policies in terms of the campus, as well as things like bias, etc. Citing AI, appropriate uses, AI information literacy in terms of the aspects of the ACRL information literacy framework. And then we finished with essentially prompting and how to prompt for better information. And then at the end, we had a little section where we included a ton of different additional resources for the students, including different articles discussing different aspects of the AI usage, generative AI, and different information where they could find more. We tried to keep it fairly short, so we had like a couple of short videos, but beyond that, it was mostly like small interactive games. In terms of sharing it, I don't know because there's some aspects.
So I think that what we could do is, Miranda, if you want to connect with Abby and I via email, we would be happy to share some screenshots of it, even if we can't share the actual course. We just have to check with the course coordinator to make sure it's okay with her.
All right, thank you. And who created the Rise 360 course? Curious about how much time it took.
I created we had created all the content together in just a shared Google document. But in terms of the actual typing, creation, etc., I did that. It took the better part of 2 workdays in terms of just taking all of the information we already had, plugging in it as appropriate. And then after that, it still took a good chunk of time in terms of just getting things to look the way we wanted them, to work the way we wanted them, going back and editing them later. I'm actually, one of our projects this summer is using Rise has a more intense and more in-depth, that company, they make a different tool that is a lot more work on the back end called Storyline, but is supposed to allow for more interactive content. So we're hoping to revamp some of the content in the course to make it even more interactive where we can. Like it allows you to put in a YouTube video and pause it in the middle and ask them clarifying questions. But I expect that to take a long time. So I would guess this took me the better part of 20 to 30 hours of work time to get it, all of the information there set up, looking correct, and working.
Was this course presented at ACRL New England last year?
It was not.
No.
It was not.
No, but we are frequently at ACRL New England, and I'll be there Friday if anybody wants to say hi.
All right. And do you also go into the writing class to provide an overview of library services?
Yes. So that's part of the general writing course is every single professor has an assigned librarian. We split this up so that it's not just one librarian going to all the different classes. But one of the things that is required is they have to at some point have a librarian come in. We don't like have a mandate on what they have to have us talk about, but generally speaking, they want us to come in when they're starting the research portion, which is when we discuss, here's the library website, here's where you find library databases, here's what a peer-reviewed source is and how to find them, and all of the wonderful general library stuff, which was another reason we wanted this to be more plug and play, so that we also didn't put more work onto our coworkers of having to learn the generative AI piece and learn how to present it in class as well.
Great. And what kind of financial support do you have for accessing AI tools? Does Bryant pay for your tools?
So Bryant pays for the limited tools that we do have access to. They just launched us having access to a private version of Claude. But otherwise, it's been us experimenting with free versions or paying for a version for a month or so out of our own pocket in order to experiment. And the reason that we have we're really fortunate to have the partnership with the outside group, they're called Alliant Group, is because, they're benefiting by having a higher ed client. So I think that's how that one's been able to work. But we are not an institution with unlimited resources by any means. So yeah, we definitely make do with what we have and try to find creative ways to use things.
And Kathleen says, we have Rise 360 and Canvas, but have found that the only way to get a Rise 360 tutorial into Canvas is via a SCORM file. Is that the way you did it?
Yes. It is, yeah, we have to export as that file that is then directly uploaded to the Canvas, which is sometimes a little finicky, but it does eventually work. A lot of technology is finicky in that way.
Okay.
Oh.
And besides business faculty, are you also considering creating an AI session or Canvas module for STEM faculty?
This is one of the areas where we have the most room for growth. There is an AI for business, AI for healthcare supply chain class that's starting. So it's kind of straddling that, where I'm pretty sure they're going to be asking for more information very shortly. We just had an AI summit here last week, and the faculty member who leads that program is really, really interested. So I anticipate that one coming up pretty soon.
I would say one of the other benefits as well is because Bryant's a very unique school in that we are so primarily business focused that every student is either a business major with another minor or a different major with at least a business minor. So if we are in business classes, it is incredibly, incredibly likely that students are going to get generative AI training in some way, shape, or form through those business classes. So that's why we're trying to approach as many of the ground level classes that the vast majority of students are taking first, so that we can eventually get up to those more specific areas of AI use with the knowledge that they have that ground level information. That, you know, when we're talking about AI specifically for STEM, we know that they know the ground level of generative AI use in the first place.
Okay. And have your writing faculty asked for or shared their desire for AI detecting tools when you share your AI knowledge? If so, what advice do you offer?
So we're part of the Ithaca SNR study on making AI generative for higher education. And as a result of that, Temple University is in the same cohort, and they created an AI detection training that they were generous enough to share with our Center for Teaching Excellence, who make it mandatory for any faculty who wants to have the AI detection turned on and turn it in, needs to go through this course first. So we really do direct them to CTE. And we also, just try to remind faculty that none of this is perfect, and you can't use, these detectors as the final arbiter. You have to be the one making that decision, because the consequences are so high that you just can't leave it to a robot. That's not fair to the students, and it's definitely not equitable.
Okay. And then we have a request for if you can share a copy of your slides to share with their coworkers.
Yeah, that we can do no problem.
So do
And
you want people to just email you for those, or?
Yep. And our slides are going to be available through our institutional repository probably in the next day or so. So you can also just Google them if you need to, and they will show up pretty quickly.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions at this point. If there are any, oh, here comes a new one. Is the Temple training something they're openly sharing with others?
So that's something I would have to ask them about, but they were pretty cool about sharing with us. So I'm hoping that they would be open to other people as well. So Bonnie, if you email me, I'd be happy to look into that for you.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. If anyone has any other final question for our two presenters, please put those either in the chat or the Q&A feature. Otherwise, we might be able to close the session a minute early. So far, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the webinar. Thank you everyone for attending the session.
And thanks for facilitating, Bree. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.